Good morning, exiles. So a Discord message hit my phone a few minutes ago, and it being 3 a.m. in the morning, I went, you know what? I feel like doing a video on the new Heist League and sharing my thoughts on that. Based on, so I've watched the Q&A with Chris Wilson. I've watched through a fair bit of stuff, all the material that they've put up. Had a bit of a read, and I've got 10 somewhat key points that I thought I'd share with everyone and summarize basically what I found in a quick format, as opposed to people watching a 35 minute video. So anyway, yeah, as an overall, I think this is going to be a really good mechanic. I think it's definitely much better than what Harvest League was. From a progression wise, there's actually a bit of an end game. Well, there is a real end game. There's storyline components. There's more ability to, well, there's a lot of gearing changes in this too, as far as better drop systems and whatnot. They're supposedly implementing more of a loot 2.0 system, similar to what happened in Diablo 3 years ago. And I'll explain, based on what Chris Wilson said in the Q&A, how they're doing that. But yeah, as an overall, my prediction of this league is it's going to be a much better league than last league. I don't think we're all going to drop off and stop playing it sooner, well, basically like what we did in Harvest. The general feedback on Harvest, as well as the player base numbers, seem to indicate that it wasn't the best league that they've put up. But they are doing some, what is essentially testing in these last few leagues for mechanics that they want to drive forwards into the new PoE 2 platform. But anyway, getting into this video a little more. So the first big thing is, obviously there's some long form content in this expansion, if we want to call it that. When I say that, essentially, it appears that they've actually added, I think they added 16 new characters. They voice acted those characters, and there's a full progression system for actually doing contracts, as they're known in the game. And that has, some credible storyline progression as well. So they haven't given away the storyline. They haven't clarified who we're actually heisting. So yeah, I feel like this is going to be a league that will play relatively up until the end, and I'm actually pretty keen to see what they've done with this. I'm also hoping that potentially, if this is as good as what I think it's going to be, I hope this goes into the main game, because it will be quite good. And also, we'll talk about the new loot that's in the game. There's a lot of new combinations of loot that you can get, which are going to completely upend builds. So the second thing is mapping or running contracts, if you want to call it that, which are sort of micro-compressed maps, are actually going to be available really early in the game while there's campaign progression. This means as you're progressing the campaign, you can burn it down quicker, but it also means the gearing options will become more lucrative from more of a quick run through an in-game progression stance. So you'll be able to get potentially better items earlier in the game, which will set you up to when you get to level 60, 65, 68 mapping at the end game by Act 10. I think this is a really good idea. This is sort of getting people into the system and routine of mapping earlier without getting into the mapping system and overcomplicating things. From what I can see, the new content, as far as the heists, are not as tedious, nowhere near as tedious as Lab. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Now, the other big thing that I noticed here will be gearing. So this introduces, so the third point that I wanted to discuss here, there's over 100 new replica uniques that are being brought into the game, according to Chris Morris. So, even just looking at, if we look at this item in the example, the Abyssus, instead of 40 to 50% increased physical damage taken, it's elemental damage taken, which means you have the potential to minimize incoming elemental damage and other methods, and essentially basically build a different way around this build. The other thing is, for example, this is adding fire damage and lightning damage and cold damage instead too, which means, you know, something like this could be used for you know, wild strike builds. In fact, this helm would be amazing for wild strike builds. There's an entirely new set of build rules that will come in, and this isn't limited to these rolls according to the Q&A. Basically, items can be rolled in all different various ways. You know, I think I saw an ambush charge that actually distributes your charges to your allies, your endurance charges to allies, which means that you could run minions that stack endurance charges. So there's a large number of things that can be done with this. The other, and this leads into my fourth point, is the new replica items. So there are new and perverse changes to some of the standard levels of gear. So this one here has, you know, elemental fire damage as its implicit, as opposed to, you know, what a critical strike or whatnot, which means there are various combinations in base gearing for rare crafting that are going to change the way that we essentially craft weapons and gear. The obvious other changes are going to be, you know, in different enchantments on gear within the actual, within the contracts as well, which is going to mean, you know, like this one, life modifiers have a 6% increase if all sockets are linked. That's really freaking cool. So, you know, in this case, you're going to get 6% on top of 128 maximum life, which is a pretty awesome mechanic. And the example they show here, physical modifiers have 15% increased effect. So if you have a fully rolled one-handed mace in this scenario, then, you know, you can increase the effect. At obviously the trade-off on this one's 2% increased attribute requirements. So there's a lot of combinations that are going to come out of these new replica loot items that are going to create new ways to build characters and also upskill and power your characters. The next really cool thing when it comes to loot is so point 5 here is the pseudo loot collection mechanics with a penalty. So basically, if you run a heist and you die within that heist, you don't get that gear. You know, as you would expect in any sort of heist or theft scenario. If we talk like oceans, if you get caught, you're not going to get the cash. So basically, this mode is enabling you to, it's buttering your chops within a heist or a contract to basically collect all this cool gear and currency. You know, you might have a mirror drop inside a vault or something like that. But, you know, then you die in the vault, you lose the mirror. Like, you're going to hate yourself for days. And you're actually going to feel the impact of that on, you know, the progress. There's a form that there's a mindset that these heists or these contracts will actually have some credible meaning to you if you fail them. So that's somewhat of you can take that one of two ways. That's either a rewarding system or it's, you know, not a rewarding system, but it also gives you an element of importance to what you're doing in the game, as opposed to Harvest League, which was you go in and you just make a farm and you harvest. You're actually going to run this mechanic with an intention to pick up cool gear, but, you know, understand that if you fail at this mechanic, you can get nothing. And I like that mechanic of risk versus reward, as we would say in the business world. And I think that's a really good way of basically making a meaningful mechanic in any league. So number 6, we don't yet know who we're robbing, which means there's an entire underlying storyline. Who are the 16 characters? Why are they there? What's their backstories? These are all really cool questions. Potentially this adds the potential for another endgame boss Uber, so like Elder or Shaper. So this feels like Delve. It's, you know, somewhat of a mechanic that, you know, you're going to actually be able to sink your teeth into and really get into, and potentially find a way to chain to. I know that you drop map contracts will drop within contracts at this stage. They may change that yet. The 7th point is this does not appear to be overly complicated. So at this stage, like, it's pretty much collect contracts, run the contracts, level up, allocate your crew. So based on this, you can plan your heist. So you can allocate crews that you want to have. The other thing that I realized is, and I'll talk about this more in the profitability section, or I'll talk about it now, is that you can actually set up heists on your contracts and then sell your contracts. So, or there's some form of doing that, or you could potentially sell those contracts to other people and basically have them run those contracts. So, I'm interested to see how we can create a currency market out of these contracts, because potentially there's a way that we can actually make chaos or exiles from the rarity of contract factors, and there's also the notion that you could get people to run contracts for you who have uber level up characters, because all the different heist characters have different sets of attributes that will enable you to do contracts in different ways or different levels of efficiency. So that's going to be really cool to see how we create an active market out of that. So I'm actually really interested to see how that works, because you could become a mercenary yourself. And I like that. And talking about mercenaries, it actually introduces the D2 Merc Mechanic. And from the Q&A, what they basically said, so this is point 8, what they basically said is that in the Q&A was that you can, at a basic level up your crew, and that actually means that there's another level of real progression within the game that's going to enable you to unlock better content within this content, which really turns this mechanic into its own game, which is really cool for a league mechanic, because potentially you could get really good return on the league mechanic. And this is not going to be the sort of league mechanic where you have to go and do maps like in Harvest, collect seeds, and then and even compared to Delve, there's no sulfite cap on doing this mechanic. You just need contracts, and contracts will drop like maps. So it's really cool. I like this. And according to GGG, if the hireling or the Merc Mechanic actually takes off, then potentially this could open us up to having like a D2 Merc come with us in standard questing, or like in the Chinese servers, a little loot character that picks up shit for you that we should be getting in Western servers. That'd be really nice, by the way. If anyone from GGG watches this video, you should probably put that in the bloody game. So anyway, on top of that, the 9th point that I've got here is the new loot compression system. So according to GGG, they are trying to refine the loot that you get within zones in this, or within contracts in these new areas. And this is part of I think they're looking at doing what is essentially a loot 2.0 system, they're trying to remove the volume of loot that drops, but make the drops more meaningful, which is essentially what Diablo did in Diablo 3 did in Loot 2.0. And basically, according to the Q&A, what they're basically doing is anything that's in a case within the heist areas or the contract areas or vaults or whatnot will actually have more of a meaningful drop. And the reason for that is when you go into somewhere, you're stealing a bunch of gear, your expectation is the gear is probably going to be pretty damn good or better. So they're trying to scale the gear with the player's expectations, also trying to allow people to basically pick up gear that's going to be essentially good to use straight off the mark, instead of having to spend huge amounts of currency in crafting that gear. Now, that potentially is going to work in two ways. Either the gear isn't going to be so good that there will be a requirement for some crafting to perfect it, and that may drive up gear prices in the market, or it'll actually flood wash the market with new and powerful gear at earlier levels, and that'll be more homogeneous in the market, which will actually drop the price of getting better gear in the market. If you're playing SSF, it'll also make SSF playthroughs much easier too. So this mechanic is actually better for, I would say, arguably better for SSF than the Harvest mechanic in many ways, because you can simply just farm the gear as opposed to having to do elaborate crafting and doing a shit ton of maps and collect seeds and have a long haul gameplay, and then, you know, switch to a completely different focus that doesn't feel like there's a progression curve or anything like that in, just to get some crafts on some gear so you can do better maps in the end. So this actually feels like there's a way to get better gear without having to do stupid amounts of work to get that gear. And it's actually a fun mechanic to get gear. So I think that this is more newer player friendly, and it's also going to allow you to progress a lot better in the game. That gets me into point 10, and there are plenty other points. We might talk about a couple other things before we tie out on this video. But compared to other leagues, this should be much more profitable again. And from a pickup and drop perspective, I feel like with better drops, you're going to make more. You're potentially going to make more chaos or exalt from the drops you get at higher level heists or contracts. The other thing is for crafters or miners in Delve, I feel like because there's no harvest mechanic now hindering the crafting process, and you know, as a delver, it really shot profits into the in the foot last league with that. With the regression back to the fossil crafting system, which is going to be the predominant crafting system, we're going to see potentially a price increase in the actual price of Delve currency again. So that's my prediction at this stage, because I think Delve will be quite profitable again, as it was in the league before this last league, and previous leagues, and has been a good way to make early currency and even currency sustainably throughout the league. And obviously I do videos, it's one of my key areas where I derive my own currency from. So I think that Delve is actually going to be profitable again in this league. So yeah. Anyway, obviously there are other changes where they're trying to, you know, put oppressive curses, where curses actually can do damage if you self-cast those curses, and they can chain. They're changing the shrapnel of skill. They're changing the steel abilities. Let's say steel, because that's their focus, and they're doing powerful spells like Flame Wall and things like that. They've got an intention to try and slow down the gameplay a little bit and make positioning a big thing. So it looks like they're trying to really gear towards the way that PoE 2 is going to function, but because in my experience playing playing at ExileCon, they have somewhat slowed the game down in some ways, but they're still making it an option currently. So you know, you can either play speed characters or you can play characters that slow right down but have way more power. So it's going to be a trade-off, speed versus power. You know, as all PoEers are, we try and circumvent that system. But yeah, anyway, that's my thoughts on the new league. Yeah, if you agree with my thoughts, or you know, if you've got some other thoughts, put them in the comments. I'm keen to talk about this. I'll be following the PoE Twitter. I'm actually going to put up some new videos on help guides for people and whatnot as well, and for newer players and beginners over the next few weeks. And yeah, like and sub, and yeah, until next time, bye.